Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world. And so much love to each and every one of you. I hope you're doing really, really well. Still got the bit of the cold going on, so I hope the reading's going to be up to scratch. But I'm so delighted you've joined me for part 2 of our story tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with part 2 of our story tonight. Once the kettle was fully boiled, and Clara had poured the tea out into oversized mugs, the two women slid into the breakfast nook. Clara was seated opposite Joyce, who was cradling her mug rather possessively in her hand and staring almost vacuously into space, with a faraway look in her eyes. Clara waited patiently for her friend to speak. It didn't do to actually push her. Finally, Joyce said, very matter-of-factly, "I'm rather worried about William. Something's not right with him, you know." Clara raised a brow. She had very defined, shapely brows. "What do you mean something's not right with William, Joyce? I saw him a moment ago, trotting off into the field on the back of his horse. He looked quite all right to me. He even waved at me, and I waved back. He seemed in a rather good mood." I don't know how to tell you this, Clara," said Joyce, shaking her head defiantly. "I've been married to William for over 50 years, you know, but of course you do know that. Sometimes I think I know him better than I know myself. He's got a fabulous sense of humour, always has had one, as you well know, and is forever cracking jokes. But over the last couple of weeks he's become very subdued and introverted, I have noticed. It's like he's withdrawn from the world, and even from me. He's not acting right, Clara. This morning, as he was shaving, I joined him in the bathroom to brush my teeth. I noticed he was studying his face in the mirror, and then he began complaining about how old he was getting." Clara let out a chuckle. "Is that all? I thought you were about to unleash a bomb in the kitchen, and all the time you're worried about William's concerns over aging. That's trivial, if you ask me. Joyce, you do know how to overreact and dramatize everything. Goodness gracious me. I cannot tell you how many times I stare in the mirror and think exactly the same thing about myself. I may not say it out loud, of course, but believe me, I'm always thinking it. I've considered getting Botox, you know, on many occasions, especially for this line between my forehead that makes me look rather bad-tempered. I've discussed that with you enough, haven't I, Joyce? You've always discouraged me to take the plunge in that regard. But then I think to myself, what's the point anyway? These lines around my face are just way too deep. And besides, my husband says they give me character. There's nothing I can do about them now, is there? I suspect I'm beyond Botox anyway. Besides, I think aging gracefully is the best approach to getting older. My mother always used to say that, and it makes perfect sense to me." "You don't understand what I'm trying to say, Clara. There is a haunted, almost lost look in William's face that I've never seen before. We've been together for years and years, as I was saying, and I think I would know if something's up with him, don't you? For starters, William is not vain, not remotely vain, never been that way inclined. He's not self-absorbed either. He's never worried about his appearance before. I'm telling you, something is going on with him. But I wish to God I knew what it was. You know what William's like. He can be mulishly stubborn at the very best of times. And if he decides he's not going to talk about something, he absolutely won't. He's always been an open book to me. But if he shuts down, he's worse than a computer virus, let me tell you. If he doesn't want to talk, he will not. I'm not sure the issue is about aging. It's a symptom of a deeper problem. That's what I really believe." "Well, what do you think it is, then?" "That's just it, Clara. I wish I knew. It all started a couple of weeks ago, actually, after he went for a check-up with Dr. Lansford. It was soon after that appointment that William seemed to drastically lose his appetite. He normally eats as if he's got 6 stomachs that he needs to fill up. But now he doesn't even seem to want to fill one stomach up. It's exceedingly bizarre, and so unlike him. He's normally a very easy-going, carefree man. I was pleased this morning when he seemed to express an interest in eating, but now I think it was just to humour me, so that I would quit asking him any awkward questions that he frankly doesn't want to answer, Clara. Like a convenient decoy or distraction, if you know what I mean. Even though he tried to eat his breakfast this morning, he really struggled. He fiddled with his knife and fork, and I saw him very discreetly passing our Labrador Molly the rest of his sausage and bacon when I wasn't looking. But I saw it all. Believe me, I did. And I am telling you this, Clara. He's completely lost his appetite. And all the food on his plate literally goes to Molly. And let me tell you, Molly is getting fat. She laces around the house all day long, digesting William's food and looking as happy as Larry. Oh, goodness gracious me. Since William has lost his appetite, Molly is looking as if she ought to be joining Weight Watchers. Well, at least someone is benefiting from William's reduced appetite. It's not funny, Clara. Why are you laughing about this? I'm being very serious. William made a very poor showing of his breakfast, leaving everything on his plate. That's never happened before until the last couple of weeks or so, when this is becoming a rather unfortunate habit of his. So naturally, I'm unduly alarmed. This morning, as he was shaving and going on about his age, I asked him if the check-up with Dr. Lansford went all right. He assured me it was perfectly routine. I think he's been economical with the truth, I really do. I know he's had his prostate examined, and you know men. They're very susceptible to prostate cancer, are they not? Especially at William's age. I even asked him if he had cancer, or a cancer diagnosis of some kind, because that was the first thing I thought of. It freaked me the hell out, Clara. What did he say when you asked him that? He said he was absolutely fine, and of course he hadn't been diagnosed with cancer. He told me I was being overly dramatic. But I'm telling you, Clara, something's up with William. We've never kept anything from each other, ever. But he's definitely keeping something back from me. I'm telling you he is. And whatever it is, he refuses to share it with me. And it's scaring the hell out of me. If you keep something from your partner, it's got to be bad. Really bad, has it not? If you've got nothing to hide, you hide nothing. Don't they say that? Well, let me tell you, I can feel it in my gut that something is decidedly off with William. Like when you open the refrigerator and you know something has turned, and you cannot locate the source of that very bad, atrocious smell until you've sifted through everything in the refrigerator and you find the offender. I know what you mean, Joyce. That's an excellent way to put it. Oh, I'm beside myself, Clara, and that's why I'm so distracted today. My mind is all over the place. I'm twisted up in knots inside of myself. I've never felt so, I don't know what the word is, but I just feel awful this morning. I mean, I just can't bear to think that William is hiding something from me. And all this talk about getting older, it's so unlike him. I don't think he'd be bothered if he looked like a scarecrow in a field. And I mean that. Not that he ever does, of course. He's a ruggedly handsome man. So I think this bizarre talk is actually a distraction of some kind. It's a symptom of a deeper problem that is going on with him, and I need to get to the bottom of it. Oh, I know he's clandestinely hiding something from me, Clara. I really do. A big fat tear rolled unabashedly down Joyce's face, followed by another and another. They all dropped into her teacup like raindrops, but she wiped them away as if ashamed of being so overwrought like this. What the hell was wrong with her, she wondered. Maybe everything with William was really just a storm in a teacup that would soon blow over. Clara looked very disconcerted to see Joyce cry like this. It was so unlike her friend, who was not driven to getting upset very easily. If Joyce believed something was off with William, maybe she was on to something. She reached out to grab her friend's hand, which she squeezed tightly. "I can't to see you cry, Joyce. I can't. I'm not used to you being like this. So upset, I mean. I'm quite sure you're upset about nothing. Let's be frank here. I've known you and William for over 50 years. And since the two of you moved into the Staffordshire ranch, which was one of the best days of my life, I might add, I met you on that day, and you're the best friend I have ever had. In my humble but shrewd opinion, William is not the kind of man to keep big secrets. I'm telling you, Joyce, he is not. If something were up with him, he would tell you. I'm sure of it. He told you himself very clearly that he has not got cancer, and he wouldn't lie to you about something as monumental as that. That would be an extremely cruel thing for him to do, and I'm sorry, but William hasn't got a cruel bone in his body, has he? Well, I suppose you're right, now that you put it like that. And yes, he's not like that. Well, there you go then, Joyce. So what if he's been off recently, been less humorous and eating less? It happens to us, does it not? Last year I went through a dark patch, but then again you know all about that. I couldn't for the life of me understand why I was so out of sorts. I was tired, I was bad-tempered, I was grumpy, I was in a foul mood all the time. I didn't have any appetite. Do you remember I'd come around to your farmhouse in floods of tears, not even knowing why I was so emotionally overwrought? I remember I burnt the toast at breakfast, and I wept and wept about that, as if it was the most awful thing that could have ever happened to a human being. Everything set me off, didn't it? You remember what I was like? Joyce considered Clara's words. Yes, I remember very well, Clara. You were in a bad way. I couldn't talk you out of your despair. I would say the slightest thing would affront you. I was in a dark place, Joyce, and I don't even know why. Well, I do now, of course. It was like the colourful world around me had gone grey and lost all its colour. I lost my appetite and so much more. It turned out I had a bad virus. We all go through ups and downs in our lives, Joyce. It's part of the rhythm of life, the cycle of nature. There are times we may be more ebullient and upbeat, and other times more tired and disconnected. It happens. Maybe that is true to a certain extent, Clara. But what I failed to tell you is over the last 2 weeks, and certainly the last 3 nights or so, worse than ever, William has been waking up in the middle of the night, sweating like a pig, and screaming out, "You're not real! You're not real!" I have to shake him out of his sleep and tell him that everything's all right and that he's just had a dreadful nightmare. So he's having nightmares, said Clara, lighting up, as if things were beginning to finally make sense to her. Well, that explains a lot, doesn't it? What do you mean it explains a lot, Clara? I'm not getting your point. Well, it makes sense to me. All your husband's symptoms that you've been describing. He's been out of sorts, he's got a poor appetite, he lacks a sense of humour at the moment, and his heart is heavy. You know, in my life, I've been through times when I've had grievous nightmares, and believe it or not, it is hard to function in the natural world when you have disordered sleep like that, and you're haunted by dark dreams. You're hardly going to be upbeat or a bright beam of light during the daylight hours, are you? I know personally, from bitter experience, I'm afraid to say. The worst was when I had my sleep paralysis. That was terrifying, and during the day I was barely able to function at all. It took quite a beating on me, let me tell you. Sleep paralysis? What on earth is that, Clara? You mean you don't know what sleep paralysis is? Asked Clara, looking somewhat confounded. No, I'm afraid I don't. What is it? I think I've heard about it before. It's when you find yourself paralysed. You've been asleep and you try to wake up, but something is holding you down, so you can't move a single muscle. You feel weighted down. It's often called the attack of the old hag. Some people report feeling hands literally holding them down. Others physically see a hag pushing down on them so hard. You can look up the phenomenon if you like on the internet. It's happened to a lot of people, and it scares them half to death with good reason. Many describe it as a demonic attack. Many people have physically seen the hag herself, that they describe as being a demonic entity of some kind. Goodness gracious me, how dreadful! Awful, said Joyce, looking appalled. That would terrify the bejesus out of me, let me tell you. It is dreadful. Do you remember when my mother-in-law died? It was about 20 years back. You mean Beryl Patchett? Wasn't that her name? You never liked her very much, did you? You and her had a fragile relationship, and that woman was always calling you offensive names. She treated you abysmally, didn't she, Clara? A ruthlessly unkind woman she was. I remember you invited us over to join you for dinner one evening, and she was at your house. She was one of the most formidable women I have ever met. She reminded me of one of the teachers I had at school growing up as a girl. She'd thrash your fingers with a ruler if you failed to concentrate during your lessons. Everyone was petrified of that woman. We called her the Dragon for good reason. She asked me once what European country gifted us the Statue of Liberty. I think that was what the question was. I didn't know the answer to that question, so she called me a stupid idiot and lashed at my fingers so hard the skin broke. And then she got mad at me for getting blood all over the desk. She was an absolute tyrant. That's right. Tyrant is a very apt way to describe her. Yes, her name was Beryl Patchett. You've got that right. I do remember you meeting her a couple of times, Joyce. As you know, we didn't get along well at all. The woman absolutely loathed me. She made no secret of that fact either. You've got a good memory on you, Joyce. I'll give you that. Well, not to put too fine a point on it, my sleep paralysis happened shortly after my mother-in-law died. I believe Beryl Patchett was responsible for those nightly attacks on me. I don't think, actually. I know she was. What? Gasped Joyce, throwing her hand over her mouth in astonishment. You are kidding, aren't you? No, I'm not kidding, Joyce. I'm being deadly serious, although I wish I was kidding. It began a day after my mother-in-law's funeral. It was a tumultuous time in our lives, believe me, because my husband was absolutely devastated to have lost his mother. It upset him that his mother never liked me, but there was nothing we could do about it. When Beryl died, it hit him hard. He took her death badly, as you would expect. It was the night after Beryl's funeral that I woke up sensing someone was in the bedroom with us. It was like someone was watching me. I felt very affrighted. I was lying back on my bed, and a dark shadow suddenly flew across the room towards me. It looked like a whirling circle of black smoke. The next thing I knew is that I couldn't move, and I could feel this heavy weight on my chest pinning me down with such a brute force, and pressing the oxygen out of my lungs, so I could barely breathe. I'm telling you, Joyce, I cannot describe to you the fear. It was nauseating. Joyce stared at Clara with wide eyes. Oh, goodness gracious, that is awful, absolutely awful. I can't imagine. Brace yourself, Joyce, because I hate to tell you this, but it gets worse. I remember looking up at the thing that was straddling me down, and it was a hag, an old hag, with messy hair spilling all over her face like black tentacles, and there were hollows for her eyes, and they were insidiously evil. The creature, or the hag, or whatever you want to call her, was growling at me, her mouth wide open, exposing these fang-like teeth. She cackled with laughter. Her face looked like a gargoyle, but I would recognize that face anywhere, Joyce. I suddenly knew, with such clarity, that the hag sitting astride my chest, sucking the very life out of me so I could barely breathe, was Beryl Patchett herself. There was no doubt about this in my mind. It was her. Just when I thought I was about to die, from the air being squeezed and expunged out of my lungs, she released her firm hold on me and let me go. I could hear this voice in my head saying, Die! Die! Why don't you just die? She let go of my chest and then disappeared into the wall like a ball of spiralling black smoke. For a moment I just sat there completely paralysed, but this time by sheer shock. I began to scream and scream. My husband was consoling me. What's the matter? What is the matter? It's your mother! I cried out. She tried to kill me! She tried to kill me! She was sitting on top of my chest, telling me that I had to die, that she wanted me to die. I couldn't move. I was so scared. It was her, Carl. I promise you, I'm not making this up. You have to believe me. Your mother's come back to haunt me. She wants to kill me, Carl. What are we going to do?
For goodness sake, Clara. My mother is dead, he scolded. I know she never liked you very much, but the dead can't do anything to the living, can they? The idea is ludicrous.
I'm telling you, Carl, it was her. It was your mother. She was holding me down. She told me she wanted me to die. I promise you, I'm not making this up. I'm really not. She was sitting on my chest. I couldn't breathe, Carl. I was so frightened. You have no idea. I was completely paralyzed.
Look, love, we've been going through emotional turmoil at the moment, you and me. And I know you never liked my mother. But all this is in your head. None of this happened tonight. It's simple. You had a very realistic, very lucid nightmare. It happens sometimes. That's what happens when you've been going through a lot of stress in your life. There's a plausible explanation for this, so that it does actually make sense. And I must apologize because we've been through a lot recently, you and me, especially with my mother's passing. And it's not only me that has suffered, but you have suffered as well. Her death has taken a toll even on you. Emotions are fraught and heightened at the moment. We all know nightmares can be very real sometimes. But what you experienced, love, was all in your head. It wasn't real. Try and remember that.
So he didn't believe you about his mother then, sitting on your chest and sucking the life out of you? Asked Joyce. I'm afraid not. He didn't believe a word of it. But then again, I can't say I'm actually surprised. My bizarre account was so far-fetched. Let's just say there really was no reasoning with Carl about any of this. He wasn't buying any of it, and I can't blame him for that. He told me in no uncertain terms that even though his mother didn't like me, there was no way on God's earth she would return from the dead to harm me. And even if she could do that, she'd never do something like that. Well, that's what he believed anyway.
I don't agree with him at all, said Joyce. That mother-in-law of yours, Beryl, was poisonously vile, and your husband Carl conveniently refused to see it. I think if she could come back from the dead to hurt you and harm you, she would. That's how vicious she was.
I agree with you, Joyce, 100%. And vicious doesn't begin to describe my late mother-in-law. And I emphatically believe, without any uncertain or wavering doubt, that Beryl was entirely responsible for my sleep paralysis, as nonsensical as that may sound. Much like my husband, I believe once you're dead, you were dead. But not any more, I don't. After my bizarre experience, my feelings have significantly shifted. I think some angry souls hang around to cause trouble, because they don't want to cross over to the other side. They have unfinished business, and I guess I was Beryl's unfinished business.
It would seem so. How long did this go on for, Clara? The sleep paralysis, I mean. I'm assuming it must have happened a few times, judging by what you've been saying.
It happened night after night, Joyce. It was the most troubling and disturbing time in my life. During the day I was a walking zombie. Which is why if your husband is having nightmares, I completely understand his flagging mental state. I really do.
Did you tell Carl that the sleep paralysis was continuing? I hope you did.
Heavens no! Are you crazy, Joyce? I knew it would only put him on the defensive. He didn't particularly react very favourably the first time his mother attacked me, so I was hardly going to tell him about the other attacks. Because he insisted I'd just had a nightmare. Carl was, how can I put it without being unkind, blind-sighted, ignorantly naive as far as his mother was concerned. In his eyes, she could do nothing wrong. He did, of course, appreciate that the two of us never got on, but he refused to see Beryl in a bad light. Carl adored his mother. He thought the sunshine came out of her backside. Of course he knew she wasn't perfect, but he refused to believe that she was treacherously evil.
because she hid it so well from him when he was around and turned up the charm like a tap of hot water. So in truth, I've never told anyone this story because it sounds so ludicrous and over the top. But I promise you it's 100% true. You do believe me, don't you, Joyce?
Of course I do, Clara. You're one of the most well-grounded people I know. I've never known you to tell a porky a day in your life. I remember the one time I was wearing a dress that you thought looked rather unbecoming on me. I asked you how I looked in it, and you told me to my face that the dress was incredibly unflattering and made me look really fat. That's how honest and straight you are. Of course, at the time I didn't take it terribly well when you told me that. The truth is, it hurt like hell. But I realized afterwards you had my best interests at heart, and you were unable to tell me a lie. So if you say Beryl attacked you during the night, I wholeheartedly believe you.
Thanks, you're the best. You really are, Joyce. You're a good friend to me, said Clara, reaching out to squeeze Joyce's hands. Thanks for believing in me. It means a whole lot. Joyce shrugged her shoulders.
Your mother-in-law hated you, didn't she, when she was alive? She thought you were never good enough for her, Carl. I remember you used to come over here to the ranch in floods of tears long before Beryl died, telling me about the horrible things she'd said to you. I remember the time you had her over for Thanksgiving. She deliberately switched the oven off for the roast turkey, and then accused you of being a lousy, sloppy housewife. You were supposed to have Thanksgiving at noon, and you ended up having it much later thanks to her.
You remember that? Goodness gracious, I'm impressed, Joyce. You've got a great memory. It was a bad Thanksgiving, let me tell you. I'll never forget the smirk and the smug, self-satisfied look on Beryl's face. Of course, Carl was getting mad at me for forgetting to put the oven on. He came in after being out on the field, feeling ravenously hungry, and looking very forward to his Thanksgiving meal. All the time his mother pretended to help me in the kitchen, claiming she was in charge of basting the turkey for me, and the potatoes, of course. For once in my life, I was appreciative that she was actually helping me out, because she never ever did. So I thanked her for her kindness. Can you believe that?
Oh, I can believe anything as far as that woman is concerned. I really can.
Well, while I thought she was helping out, and, basting the turkey and so forth, she'd clandestinely switched the oven off. And then she blamed me in front of my husband, as if it was all my fault.
Oh, dear me, Clara. We were supposed to eat at lunchtime, and your husband is so hungry. But you forgot to put the oven on, didn't you? You're not a very domesticated woman, are you, love? I don't think you're really cut out to be a rancher's wife. If you want to keep my Carl happy, you're going to have to sharpen up your act and do a whole lot better than this. Can't you see how hungry Carl is? You really are very sloppy, aren't you, dear? You should learn how to organize yourself better. When I used to cook Thanksgiving dinner, we all ate at lunchtime without fail, didn't we, Carl? It was always served on time.
I'm telling you, Joyce, I wanted to throttle her for her lies. She was loving the discord she provoked. If that wasn't bad enough, that evening when we finally ate our meal, she deliberately dropped all the roast potatoes on the kitchen floor, so our dog gobbled them up.
Oh dear, Carl. Your wife is so cack-handed with the dishes. She's only gone and dropped the roast potatoes all over the kitchen floor, and the dog's eaten them up, I'm afraid. So I'm afraid there is no roast potatoes for Thanksgiving, and I know how much you love them.
My mother-in-law knew how peeved Carl would be not to have roast potatoes with his dinner. She looked like the cat that had got the cream over Thanksgiving, let me tell you. It was a miserable Thanksgiving, but it was always that way when she was around. And Carl failed to see what she was actually doing, trying to stir the pot with her spite. After she left our home that weekend, I heard her say to Carl,
"Love, I warned you that you could do so much better than Clara. She's not cut out for life on the ranch. She was so overwhelmed over Thanksgiving dinner. Didn't you notice she could barely cope at all? You saw what a debacle she made.
You deserve so much better than her, son, so much better." "Wow," said Joyce, shaking her head indignantly. "That woman was a prize cow, if ever I saw one." "Well, she made no secret of the fact that she despised me. Even on our wedding day, I remember her exact words, Joyce. She actually called me a trollop. Can you believe that? I didn't actually know what the word trollop meant until I looked it up in the English dictionary. The word describes a woman who's a cheap slag with no moral compass or virtue whatsoever." "She called you a trollop on your wedding day? That's seriously sick, Clara. I mean, Carl had chosen to marry you, and she may not have liked you, but that's tough. Think about it. There must be millions of people on this planet who have mother-in-laws that don't particularly like them. But I think the vast majority of them hide it well. It's what you have to do, to be polite and not to ruffle any feathers. Parents don't want to upset their children, do they? But not Beryl. She wanted you to know that she despised the bones of you. But even I would think she would not stoop so low as to call you such a dreadful name on your wedding day of all things. You would think that on that special day, the Wicked Witch of the West would have had the grace to keep her forked tongue locked up for once." "Well, she didn't hold her tongue, if that's what you're saying. If the truth be told, I think she did her damnedest to stop us getting married. But to no avail. Carl might be many things, but thankfully he's not a pushover as far as his mother's concerned. Well, was concerned. She manipulated him successfully about many things, but not about who he chose to marry. "Carl, my dear," she told him, "you could do so much better than Clara. That woman has absolutely no breeding, love. Ghastly bright colours she wears all the time. They give me a migraine headache. Honestly, love, I cannot for the life of me understand what you see in that woman. I think she will make a deplorable rancher's wife. I'm sorry, I do." "What did Carl have to say about that?" "I hope to goodness he stood up for you, Clara." "Well, he did, of course. He told his mother to stop running her mouth like a lawnmower and that he was sorry she didn't like me, but he loved me, and there wasn't a jot that she could do about it. Let me tell you, that shut her up very quickly." "What an awful woman she was, Clara. It really makes me appreciate my own mother-in-law and how wonderful she was. So what happened after she called you a trollop on your wedding day of all things? I hope you had the courage to tell her where to go." "Well, I was used to her untamed tongue, wasn't I? I remember I was getting ready to walk down the aisle on my wedding day. My mother had just left the changing room to wish me well. "You look so stunning, Clara," she told me with tears in her eyes. "I've never seen you look more beautiful, love. I hope Carl realizes how lucky he is." "I'd better love you and leave you, sweetheart. Otherwise I'm going to break down in tears. It's very emotional for me seeing you there in your wedding dress. You look sensationally beautiful, and I don't want to look like a raccoon in your glossy photographs, with mascara running all over the place. Your father will be here in any second to pick you up so that he can walk you down the aisle. And when he sees you, he is going to break down as well." "Go, Mum," I told her, "or you'll get me started too. And let me tell you, this makeover cost a fortune." My mother left, and I was in the dressing room on my own, staring at my reflection in awe because I looked so stunningly beautiful in the dress I was wearing. I was so excited, and I was waiting for my father to come in any second to pick me up. And the dressing room door threw open. I thought it was my father, but no, it wasn't. It was Beryl. She was snarling at me like a rabid dog. She was practically foaming at the mouth. I'd never seen her look so mad. I expect the reality had hit her hard, that there was nothing she could do to stop her son from marrying me, so she might as well make my special day as miserable as she possibly could. She marched towards me furiously and poked me in the chest and said, "You will never be good enough for my son, Clara. You hear me? You will never, ever be good enough for him. He deserves so much better than you. You're nothing but a big fat trollop. You may have fooled my son, young lady, but you don't fool me one little bit. I cannot for the life of me understand what my son actually sees in you." "That is very rough," said Joyce, pulling a sympathetic face. "What did you say to that?"
"I told her that if Carl was to choose between me and her, there would be no contest. She practically growled at me, she was so irate. I don't think she believed I had the gall to say that, but I did. It was my wedding day, and I was not going to be bullied by that woman."
"How dare you! My son would choose me over you any single day of the week, Miss High and Mighty. Who the hell do you think you are, saying such a spiteful, vindictive thing to me like that? You're nothing but a piece of trailer trash. You are just a dreadful, dreadful person, and you don't deserve my son. I've known my son much longer than you, and one of these days, when he finally comes to his senses, he'll be demanding a divorce from you. And when he does, I will throw a big party, bigger than this wedding, let me tell you, to celebrate seeing the very back of you."
"Wow, I don't know what to say about that, Clara."
"I never knew any of this. What happened next?"
"Well, she just belligerently stormed out of the room, so she really put a damper on my wedding day. Glared at me furiously when I walked down the aisle, and during the service she began to have a coughing fit to drown out, the pastor's voice. And I know it was deliberate. When they said,
'If there is anyone who objects to these two being joined together as man and wife, may they speak now or forever hold their peace,'
I was absolutely certain that Beryl's arm would shoot up and she'd say something very vicious, but she never did. She was like a thundercloud the whole wedding day. I remember in all the photographs after the ceremony she had this angry scowl on her face, and she told everybody who would listen at the wedding that my marriage to her precious son was doomed and it would never last, and I'd only married him because he had money, and I was just one of these horrible gold diggers. That's what she said."
"What an absolute bitch! Did you tell Carl that his mother ruined your wedding day? I hope you did."
"No, I didn't, because that would have caused him great upset. I didn't want to make a big deal about it. Besides, if I did, I'd only make Beryl believe that she'd really upset me, and I didn't want to give her the satisfaction. That would have made her extremely happy. Over the years I stood my ground, as she hurled abuse at me, left, right and centre. I pretended it was water off a duck's back, and I know it really irked her. I think she wanted me to unravel, like a ball of wool, but that was never going to happen."
"You're a braver woman than me, Clara. I don't know how I would have coped if my mother-in-law had been insidiously cruel like that to me. I was lucky William's mother was so wonderful. We were incredibly close, and when she died it broke my heart. She was a second mother to me, she really was."
"Well, when Beryl was dying, it was a different story altogether, let me tell you. You'd think she'd have some regrets, reflect on her unkind treatment towards me over the years, or even have the decency to ask for forgiveness, especially if she was about to meet her Maker. But there was none of that. In truth, I'm not sure she even believed in God. So there we are. That is the end of part 2. Part 3 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night."